Hello, everyone. We'll get started soon, just as soon as some of our some more participants show up to the meeting. Though, in the meantime, as usual, it'd be great if we could get a volunteer to take notes.
Hello, hello.
Okay, we've got a note taker now, so I think we can get started. So welcome everybody to the latest MIMI interim meeting for June 19. That's funny, the slides just disappeared on me. Okay, as usual, please note well the note well, in particular the IETF's policies on intellectual property and the code of conduct. We already have a note taker. Thank you very much, Brendan. It's much appreciated. So let's move on to the agenda bash. So the only thing we have on the docket is, I believe Rowan wants to present on updates to the content format draft. And past that, go ahead, Rowan.
Yes, please.
Yeah. And beyond that, I guess the floor is open in case anybody wants to say anything more about metadata privacy, those discussions we started last time. It does seem like there's been some motion on that on the mailing list just this morning, or rather just before this meeting. And I saw, Rowan, you have a couple of changes up for encrypted handshake proposals. So if anybody wants some time to speak to either of those questions, we have plenty left over. So, yeah, anybody want to suggest an item?
Conrad just sent a summary to the list just a few minutes ago as well.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. It seems like that's pertinent to the metadata privacy question.
Yeah, that's just a summary essentially of the two approaches we discussed so far, the pseudonym-based approach and the encrypted handshake messages-based approach. It's quite short, so if you just want to glance at it, but not sure we want to discuss it further. It was more meant as a kind of cheat sheet and overview to give people an idea of what the two approaches entail.
Fair enough. Well, let's get into content format, and then after that, we'll see what's up with metadata privacy. 1 sec, Ron. There we go. Grant.
Okay, so real briefly on the MIMI content format, there's an 04 version, which I submitted not long ago, a few weeks ago, a week and a half ago maybe, and it has. So basically, the big thing is that we now have a concrete CBOR syntax with a CDDL schema. All the examples are CBOR instance documents. They all validate with the schema. The examples are all in the GitHub repo, and the examples also include more complex multi-part, multi-part body type things that look like multi-part alternative, multi-part mixed, multi-part alternative style things that would be familiar to people who have done stuff with email. And since the 03 version was since the last IETF, I'll just mention that I did add a hash of the content, the external content array. That was something I'd meant to do during the 02 for the 02 version, and it had just fallen off my plate. I'd forgotten to do it. So I'm curious. Maybe. I'm real curious how many people have actually looked at this. So I know that there's not a lot of experience with people using CBOR, and I basically feel like this was the sort of the least bad option that we could have gone with, because they're not really off-the-shelf validation tools that we would have been able to use with TLS presentation language and extensibility model. It just gets kind of complicated. We have had a couple of people from the CBOR working group who've had a glance at it, but so far I think I'm the only one who's been like running validation on these on a regular basis. Raphael, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, so I have not looked at the latest draft, but we did implement an earlier version, at least partially, and I was wondering who else is actually implementing that. Are you maintaining an implementation, Ron? Or do you know of anyone?
Yeah, I have a stub. I will have an implementation by the next IETF.
Okay. Because I think it would be nice to compare notes going forward and see what's hard to implement or what maybe doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody else here who is planning to implement that is willing to speak up? And maybe we could even do a show of hands tool if there's anyone who wants to remain anonymous but wants to express that they would actually be implementing this. Tim, Alyssa, are you guys willing to do a show of hands for this?
Sure, I guess. I mean, we're a small group, but if you think it would be helpful, I think we can do that. Let's see. Can you see it?
I can see it.
Pretty exciting. I like no opinion. Thank you. Thank you, no opinion.
It's slightly better than watching paint dry.
Right. Oh, shooting up. Look at that. Anonymity doubled our implementer pool here. Well, there's 17 of us here and there's 7 responses. We're getting a pretty good response rate too. Nobody has said no. So there's potentially 10 additional implementers right here in this meeting. Okay. Going once, going twice. So it looks like, oh, Rowan, if you're speaking, I cannot hear you.
No, I was just speaking to my granddaughter who
okay.
came up to ask about breakfast. So
there you go. It looks like there's
okay.
potentially 4
Okay.
implementers.
All right. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Just another thought, if you feel like you're at this point in the process, we could ask for an apps area review, which might get us a reviewer who's dealt a lot more with CBOR if you wanted. I mean, it's not a required step of the process at any point, but it's something we could potentially ask for, or I could ask Ori what he thinks.
Okay.
Do you think that would be useful, or you want to wait longer?
Let's see if we get more comments from people from the CBOR mailing list.
Okay.
Maybe give it 2 weeks, and then we can, if we need to ask, we can ask in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Just going to the open issues real quick. So we've got there are three issues related to different CBOR options, which I'm basically looking for input from the CBOR community. The most interesting of these is for this group is that we have some implied values. So they're values that we would have extracted from the MLS message. So the message ID, the timestamp, things like that. So this may not even really belong here. These are more things. These are values which an API might get access to, but they're not conveyed in the content format. They are just values that would be useful and are used, specifically the message ID is used extensively by the content format. It's just assumed that it's delivered by the MLS layer or by a higher level protocol. The other 2 issues are the subject field. So I propose that we close this one because it can be handled in the extensions map. Ron Peters, who opened the issue, he said he was fine with that. But that he was fine with that in principle. There hasn't been sort of a concrete, here is how you use the extensions map, but I think it's pretty straightforward and pretty obvious how you would do that. Unless there's any objection, I'm going to go close that after the meeting today. And then the earliest, oldest one is matrix extensible events, which no longer seems particularly relevant. Travis, I don't know if you want to speak in favor of preserving this or some aspect of this for any reason.
I think if we do want to maintain it, then we'll either open another issue or pursue it via the list. Okay.
All right. So you're okay if I close this issue for now, and you can add something else?
Yeah, I think that's probably fine for now.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, so I'm just going to bring up one more issue here. So in the context of working on Mimi protocol, I did a PR for abuse. I did a PR for, a bunch of other things. And we ended up with using an implicit a message ID which is derived from the hash of the ciphertext of the MLS message. And we already know that we're using this message ID inside of the Mimi content format to refer to other messages extensively. And in some cases, a client is going to be receiving it might receive a reply, for example, which refers to a message ID of the original message, which occurred before the receiver was a member of the group. So this means that already we have, I was a little bit uncomfortable with this because of that. But for abuse prevention, and in the case where, I think there are a number of people who want to be able to share history, at least among different clients of the same user in a consensual way, the decrypted message, that we may have the content of the decrypted message, but not have the contents of the ciphertext. And so there's no independent way to verify the message ID. So we can go forward with this and just take the assertion in these two cases and require that for abuse prevention that somebody is keeping the ciphertext of a message that they're going to report, or that assume that the hub has the ciphertext around somewhere. So just wondering if anybody wants to comment on this. I will mention the old solution, the solution that had been in the 02 draft, I think, was 01 draft. It was that the client basically chooses a UUID and it exposes the message ID in the MLS additional authenticated data of the private message. And so the provider would have a copy of the message ID. This could be, even encrypted or obfuscated in some way. But basically the clients would be responsible for detecting duplicate message IDs among the messages that they received, and the hub provider could reject messages with duplicate message IDs, but would not be required to. Now, in some ways, this is not as strong as using a hash or the ciphertext, but it did offer a lot of, it did offer this sort of binding of the inside of the message and the outside of the message. I think my main concern here is if we do message franking, that we need to be able to frank the message ID. Richard and I had some conversations about this. Unfortunately, he's not available today. I don't know, maybe Conrad or Raphael, maybe one of you would like to, if you have some comment about this.
I don't have a strong opinion, but I think it might be premature to design something that might be helpful for history sharing, because that's a different set of problems we should look at, and we might come up with an entirely different solution that has nothing to do with that. So yeah, that's what I want to say. It feels a little premature to keep something around just because it might be needed for something else.
Okay, and regarding abuse prevention, do you have any concerns there?
I think that falls into the same category in the sense that needs a holistic approach, potentially more comprehensive one, like message franking or something similar. And then that should define what we need here.
Okay.
But this is not a full spec for any sort of message franking at this point. It's just a bit, it's a hand-wavy proposal on how this could potentially be useful for message franking. So I think it's not a great thing to keep it just because of that.
Yeah, so I wasn't actually proposing that we make a change to the document at the moment. I was more just trying to leave this, make this as a there is a possibility that we may need to reopen this in the future if we figure out that we don't have a better way of dealing with this problem when we address abuse and if we ever address history sharing. Okay. Would anyone like to make any other comments about the content format? If not, I think we're basically ready to, kind of stick it on the back burner until Mimi protocol is a little bit further done, and then I think we'd be ready for working group last call at that point. Okay. I'm ready to hand over to someone who wants to talk about metadata. I did prepare one slide with
So does anybody want to, the floor is open if anybody wants to talk about metadata privacy.
I'm happy to read my one slide and then leave it up and let other people talk about it. Conrad.
Yep.
Sure.
Okay. Richard wrote up basically a summary of the handshake metadata issues, like what our different options were, ranging from no protection through like a pseudonym-based protection. So no protection obviously has no protection. Pseudonym-based means that the hub and followers can all see the number of clients from each provider. And that the hub can enforce policy based on, the hub can enforce policy based on the pseudonym user identities. And in the sorry about the real-time editing here. Okay. In the third case, we have commits, or we have handshake messages sent with private message, and so they're encrypted only for members, but then also a separate copy sent and encrypted to the hub. The hub would see the number of clients from each provider, but the followers do not. They just know, they only know the name of the hub provider. The hub could then still also enforce policy based on the pseudonym user identities. And then finally, members being able to support only being able to be allowed to only send private messages. And in this case, the hub has no information whatsoever, and the hub has no ability to do policy enforcement. So basically, I think we have the second one here is more or less what is in the draft right now. The fourth one is what Brendan has proposed, that the clients be able to do this with his proposal. And 3 has come up on the list as a few people have come up in favor of this, and that I did one PR that describes a way to do this, which I basically don't like. And I have another proposal, a proposal for an MLS extension, which I just submitted this morning for how to do the third one. So I'm going to hand over to Conrad.
Okay. I haven't really prepared anything, so I'm just trying to moderate, I guess. So maybe one question, Rohan, with regard to your slide. To understand correctly, the third point, commit send with private message encrypted separately to hub, that's based on the pseudonyms, right? So it's still the pseudonym approach, except that we're using ciphertexts with the private part accessible to the hub, with plain text accessible to the hub. Is that correct? Hello, hello. Am I audible here? Or is this?
Yeah, you're audible.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Conrad, but I missed briefly. I had a little glitch.
No worries. Yeah, so just to repeat, the third point, that's kind of on top of the pseudonym-based approach, right? So this is not meant to still use real
Yes.
identities. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I mean, I think we've discussed the different approaches, and I hope everyone has a rough idea of how they work. I guess I think, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, you still wanted to send an ID with some more details on your encrypted handshake messages approach?
Yeah, I do still intend to do that, write an ID basically with that proposal written more explicitly, basically in a way that it could actually be implemented.
Right. Okay, because from what I remember in the last discussion, there were still a couple of questions there, but I think ultimately it comes down to what kind of functional kind of drawback we're prepared to have, like what kind of cost are we willing to pay for this metadata protection in terms of functional impairments. Yeah, Brandon.
So one question that does come to mind for me reading this is it says that the hub can do no policy enforcement, but I don't think that's totally accurate because the hub can do policy enforcement. It can restrict who can access the group in terms of its own local users. So the hub can restrict which of its own local users can access the group. And also follower servers can also do that same thing where they can only restrict which of their own local users can access the group. And then the hub can also restrict which followers can access the group. So if we don't trust follower servers to do this kind of access control properly themselves, why would we trust follower servers to not create a bunch of fake pseudonyms? Like, why are we trusting followers to manage the pseudonyms correctly if we don't trust them to do access control? I guess is my question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I guess the question is then what kind of policy control do we still expect, and if we want to hide metadata from the hub and potentially from the followers as well, Rowan? Or sorry, Alyssa was ahead in the chain. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just a question back for Brendan. Isn't what you said true for all of these scenarios, though?
Well, so if
In every case, we're expecting that the hub can enforce on that each server can enforce on its own users.
Right, but there's a separation between what we're talking about here, which is either pseudonyms or encrypted handshake messages, and what the draft currently does, which is it has unencrypted handshake messages. So if you have unencrypted handshake messages, you can see like a real user identity, and you can like see this is a real person. Versus if you have pseudonyms, you know, I could create 1,000 fake pseudonyms, and you would have no clue who is actually behind that. Or if it's one user, or if it's 1,000 users. That's essentially the question.
Sorry, I'm not really getting your distinction here, Brendan. Basically, with all four of these approaches, a server that is not the hub could assert whatever identity they want because it's in their domain. So if I assert a real identity or a pseudonym, it seems kind of orthogonal. But what we're saying in the case of, you know, the Mimi protocol draft today makes a recommendation of using per group pseudonyms. So if you use a per group unique pseudonym, then what is you're saying this is, you know, I have an identity on this provider, and we can verify that that's true. And then we have ways of also inside of the membership of the group, being able to reveal the actual real user identity optionally at the members option. So what is the problem that you're concerned about the follower being able to craft additional pseudonyms?
So if you think about like a reputation-based kind of management, or like a reputation-based abuse mitigation system, like you have with email, where I'm like brendan@gmail.com. If I go to any other email server, it's always brendan@gmail.com. Everybody can see that. So if I start spamming people, servers that aren't Gmail can basically blacklist me and say Brendan is a spammer, don't let him send emails to you. But whether we do pseudonyms or encrypted handshake messages, in both cases, you lose that reputation-based system where the hub server has to interact with users from follower servers, but also the hub server is denied knowing who those users are, which is the concern.
So you're saying it makes no difference which of these 4 approaches we take, all of them, like if you use pseudonyms at all of them suffer from the lack of reputation of being able to use a traditional reputation system that naively uses the name of the pseudonym to see if you have a particular reputation.
Well, if you use pseudonyms or encrypted handshake messages, in both of those cases, reputation wouldn't work to prevent abuse. But if you use unencrypted handshake messages and no pseudonyms, then you could do that. You could.
Okay, but I think what we're interested in right now is whether nobody is seriously proposing going with solution 1. And so we have proposals for solution 2, 3, and 4. And there's no difference between the reputation, the possibility of doing abuse management using the same scheme with option 2, 3, and 4. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, which is where my question comes from. What's the value of having the per group pseudonym if it can't be used to mitigate abuse that way?
Okay, so there is a combination. So one of the things that you can do with pseudonyms is many of the uses of enterprise federation and of DMA style, consumer to somebody federation, they have SLAs, and they have specific rules about things like spam. And so saying that if you have a pseudonym, you cannot offer, you have a certain amount of rate limiting, or you need to use a privacy pass style scheme so that real users can only get a certain number of pseudonyms, or you need to have, some way for the local provider to be able to banish people who do, sort of extreme versions of abuse, that they need to be able to revoke the ability to use other pseudonyms of the same real user. There are a variety of approaches. There are probably half a dozen of them. So the fact that you cannot use the naive way of doing it does not mean that there's not a way to solve that problem in the aggregate, in the overall system.
Okay, Raphael.
Yeah, actually, Ron, you just said all the things that I was about to say. So I think it's we're painting a bit too dark a picture if we say that reputation systems don't work anymore just because we don't have real identities. On our end, we've been exploring privacy paths quite a lot, trying to come up with a way to make that work. Obviously, there could be other approaches, but it's certainly helpful to look at one in depth, just to convince ourselves that, if that works, then probably others will work as well. So yeah, I'm by far not as pessimistic. It's just that the reputation-based systems will have to have some privacy baked in. That's all it is. And I mean, obviously, you probably always lose a little bit if you say goodbye to real identities. but if it's not too much, then that shouldn't affect operations too much either.
Okay, and I think I just want to reiterate, I had the same thought as Rowan as well initially, that there is a way, at least in the approach we thought of in terms of pseudonyms, to reveal to the hub or to followers who is behind a given pseudonym, and then you can sanction that person, kick it off the group, or what have you, prevent it from further sending messages. I mean, you could do that on the client side as well, which you can do in approach 4, but then the message is already sent and delivered and come through the whole network. So yeah, I think it remains the fact that there are more options for the hub to do things if it can at least see pseudonyms one way or the other. And so yeah, I would propose at some point we just need to make a decision. I mean, I think we already somewhat landed on the idea that we want like a full metadata mode where it's just public handshake messages, and we want a metadata protected mode. And then it's just a question, do we want one metadata protected mode? Probably, maybe we could also have 2, I guess, but then it depends on how much of the rest of the protocol we have to change to accommodate that mode. Or if we could more or less like use the same structures in the same architecture for the metadata protected mode. Again, another thing to consider if we want to make a decision here. So my proposal would be to wait for Brendan's ID and then figure out what exactly that entails in terms of changes to the rest of the kind of Mimi architecture and the functionality we have to change or live without if we want to use that particular flavor of metadata protected mode. I think that's all the thoughts I have, at least for the moment. Rowan, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, I think if we go with this 4th, if members can use private message in a way that the hub gets no information about what's in a commit or a handshake, I just think that we are going to lose. We're going to have to come up with a whole new mechanism for how we do almost everything in Mimi, and I think it's unlikely that it's going to get deployed with big networks, either existing consumer or existing enterprise networks, because of their legal requirements. And I think we need to offer, either like basically offering either 2 or 3, I think is going to be essential for deployed networks to be able to go and implement Mimi. So I don't know that this is going to be too. I don't see, like, in terms of the privacy benefit between 3 and 4, I don't see a huge privacy benefit there, and I see a huge amount of additional complexity.
I just wanted to ask Rowan, what are the mechanisms in Mimi that would need to be reworked? And also, what are the legal requirements that are concerning to you in terms of number 4?
Yeah, I think the legal requirements of, like, know your customer, and being able to do, like, if someone is banished from a particular group, being able to support that feature, that I think that is considered an essential requirement by in the consumer space, and that it's often someone like a user gets banished from a room, and then they're basically on a very short leash, and then if they misbehave again, then their account can be deleted, or they can be suspended or whatever. But there's often a range of different abuse mitigation options, and so if the hub doesn't know which user or which pseudonym is in a particular group, then it has no recourse, no ability to ban somebody if they don't know who's there.
But they do have the ability to ban when we use pseudonyms, because you can ban the pseudonym.
Yeah, I mean, you can ban the pseudonym, and in the mechanisms that we discussed, like if the local provider has a mapping between pseudonyms and real user anywhere, even if it's in case of like break glass, in case of emergency style, then all the pseudonyms associated with the real user can then be hunted down and like removed from the group, or they can be suspended or deleted, or the forwarding stopped for them, what have you. The forwarding can be stopped also in a variety of other ways that don't require that backwards mapping.
But it sounds like in this argument, we are still needing to trust the follower server to give that map of pseudonyms, or to give the correct map of pseudonyms to a real user. So if the hub wants to ban someone from every group that they're in, we have to trust the follower server to give the correct list of pseudonyms that correspond to the user in every group. Is that right?
So the part of the SLA between, when doing peering is often you have to follow policies where you have the ability to do something like this. And if you don't have the ability to do that, or it's found out that you are breaking the rules, then the recourse is to prevent them from ever peering with you again. So that's pretty common.
I guess it's not clear to me why the agreement couldn't go the other way, where I could tell a follower server as a hub that I don't want this user in any groups that I host ever again. And the agreement couldn't be that the follower server has to enforce that.
I mean, if you could write something up to describe that, I'm not quite seeing how that would work. Maybe you could elaborate in a few more sentences.
Right. So right now what you're saying is that we have to trust the follower to give us the correct pseudonyms for we have to trust the follower server to give us all of the pseudonyms that correspond to some real user that they don't want on their service anymore.
Not give us that. If we, yeah, like if I say, like the hub doesn't need to receive a list of pseudonyms from that user's local provider.
But then how does banishing the user from the service work?
So the hub would tell the provider, in the case of, so like if it was just a single pseudonym, right, they would tell the local provider, this pseudonym did something, that caused me to do the following action on my service, and this is what I am expecting of your provider with respect to this pseudonym and any and any pseudonyms associated with this actual user.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Just wanted to highlight, since there is apparently a restriction in terms of what you can do in terms of policy enforcement. Oh, sorry, Alyssa, you're probably going to say the same thing.
I don't know, but yeah. So I was sitting there maybe thinking the same thing as you, Conrad. I think wherever we land with this in the protocol itself, I think we definitely need like an articulation of all of the typical admin actions and how we envision them working under the metadata protective scenario. So like, ban, kick, block, report, like all of these different things that regardless of exactly what we think any particular provider's requirements are going to be, we sort of expect that if these are features that are commonly offered today in a non-interoperable scenario, that various actors who may adopt Mimi will want to be able to support them in the interoperable scenario. Like how are each of those going to work under the metadata protective situation. So I think that's something we are going to need, even whether that's to suss out this conversation or like in the ultimate instance after we've made a decision. But I think we definitely need that.
Okay, so this might be interesting to compile. At least as for the pseudonym-based front, I can volunteer to elaborate how or if any of these things can be done can be done in terms of policy enforcement, or at the very least under which assumptions. For example, under the assumption that the follower provider knows the group membership of each of the users, or has a pseudonym mapping, or a, in case of emergency, break glass kind of mapping, as Ron said. So that I can do, and then I think mostly the key piece missing would be the ID on the encrypted handshake messages. And then I would propose we postpone this discussion to the next time, since then we hopefully have more information. Is there anything else that people would find useful to have until then, besides this aforementioned list of things that can be done with the different approaches?
So just one more comment on that, which is I also think to the extent that there's a different enforcement model for an enterprise case versus a consumer case, it would be useful to talk about that as well. So like the kind of thing that Rowan was talking about, where you use the bulk statistics about pseudonyms as one prong in your enforcement policy between the hub and the follower server. Like that's something that might only be feasible in an enterprise case. It would be good to tease that out for each of the different admin functions that we think we want to be able to support.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else?
Okay. I can jump in, or Tim, I don't know if you want to summarize.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so thanks everybody. This was a good discussion. We have another interim in 2 weeks, which I think might also be a little bit lightly attended. I will not be there. I know I will be on vacation. But it sounded like there were some folks who would still be available for that one. And I think if we have the new draft from Brendan by that point, then that definitely makes sense as a discussion topic. We can continue this discussion. If not, I think we might be a little bit light on agenda topics, unless the team discovery has anything new by then. So I think we're a little bit up in the air about whether we will actually go forward with the July 3 interim. Beyond that, we do have an interim scheduled the week prior to the IETF, I think, on July 17th, which we can certainly use or cancel if people will be in transit, but it's the Wednesday before. So we can kind of suss that out as it gets closer. But if people have very strong feelings about having those interims or not having them, please speak up. Okay, I think we are done. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.